Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark Magnacca, and my co-host Robert Brandt and I are joined today by Honourable Greg Rickford. Greg is the Minister of Indigenous Affairs and First Nations Economic Reconciliation. Greg is also the Minister responsible for Ring of Fire economic and community partnerships. Ontario has long been one of the major manufacturing centres in Canada. However, with the increasing electrification of everything, attention is now shifting towards the province's potential in the critical minerals sector. Many have heard about the Ring of Fire, but where and what is it exactly?
The Honourable Greg Rickford, Ontario's Minister of Indigenous Affairs, First Nations Economic Reconciliation, and the Ring of Fire.
And the minister responsible for economic and community partnerships in the Ring of Fire. Shared responsibility with my good friend and colleague, the Minister of Mines and Energy, Stephen Lecce.
So quite a few hats, and we appreciate you taking time out to talk to us on Drumbeats. Why don't you explain to our audience a bit about your personal background, history of how you got to be in the position you are today?
Well, I started out in as a nurse, actually, way back in the day. Had an opportunity fairly quickly to pursue my passion, which was to live in Northern Canada proper, and got some really good experience in hospitals in Southern Canada and the United States, and then went north. It just sort of evolved from there. I'm a lifelong learner and back in and out of school, and eventually finished law school at McGill. And within 3 or 4 years of living in Kenora, out in northwestern Ontario, Keewatin actually, in a legal practice, an opportunity to pursue my, one of my superordinate goals was to get into politics. And as a nurse and as a lawyer, Rob, politicians, the central feature of all of those professions is advocacy. So I kind of felt like I came by it honestly. And it's just been an extraordinary journey. I did 7 years as the federal member of parliament for Kenora. Had a chance to serve as Canada's Minister of Science and Technology, then the Minister of Natural Resources for the last almost 3 years of Prime Minister Harper's tenure as Prime Minister. And then, the electorate, the way that it is, lost a tight race in 2015 and returned to my law practice. And a couple of years later, the bug was still there. So, and I'm a big fan of Premier Ford. It was an extraordinary opportunity from the outset. One of the few people in the new government that had cabinet experience. So I had a lot of portfolios, and kind of brings us to where we are today. As time has marched on, the past 6 years and a bit with Premier Ford, he's really come to us understand, but more importantly, appreciate, what an extraordinary opportunity we have in Ontario, and particularly in Northern Ontario, but writ large with First Nations communities and First Nations businesses. And so with that appreciation came a sharpened focus on building the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs out. As I said at the conference, the addition of First Nations Economic Reconciliation just about a year ago was really, his sense and mine, a long time, that economic reconciliation was the next chapter in the journey, if you will, that Canada and for our purposes, Ontario, ought to prioritize. It wasn't our opinion. It was an assessment of what we were seeing and hearing from First Nations leadership, not confined just to the political arena, but more importantly, a much higher profile of Indigenous business leaders across the country. And what brings us to, the Ring of Fire responsibilities.
And can I just stop you for a
Sure.
second? Because you mentioned the conference.
Yeah.
And you were in London for the second annual Canadian Indigenous Investment Summit. You very kindly spent the entire day with us, and
Yes.
more than one person remarked, and it was noticed by me too, that in many cases you have a minister speaking at a conference, as you did. They will come in with their team for the designated slot, leave immediately after. You spent the entire day with us, and were around and reflected. At the end of the day, you spoke to the gathering about reflections.
That's right. I rattled off my list of words and phrases that I'd picked out.
So maybe for our audience, just some of those reflections, if you can recall.
Well, I mentioned that I'm a lifelong learner, and it's my own style, but I really enjoy these conferences. And there is a tendency, for cabinet ministers, government folks to pop in and out of conferences. It's understandable in some respects. There's a lot of demands on their time. But London's a long way away from home. And frankly, I made this my absolute priority because I just thought, wow, look at the lineup of people, yourselves included, and the panels, just at times riveting, and just a positive environment to be around. I don't know how you walk away from that. So I certainly couldn't, and really just humbled that I got a chance to participate in it, frankly.
And what were your takeaways when you reported back to your colleagues in cabinet and the premier? And
I just think it's a really good day and a really good thing when we spend time talking about opportunities specifically for Indigenous business and their leaders. This is, for us in Ontario, as I said, this is the way of the future. How we do business. People will judge and form their opinions, I think, based on how important we the emphasis that we place on the participation of and partnerships with First Nations communities and the businesses that are fast becoming very sophisticated, very prominent in large-scale legacy infrastructure and resource projects. To see those folks, many of them I bump into, at home and across the country. Sean Willie, guys like him I've known for a very long time. And it's cool. It's not partisan. First Nations politics in general is not overly partisan. So you feel very comfortable in the environment on a political level. But for business, it goes without saying, we've got some great people. And I think this summit, the summit reflected that.
That's great. And certainly it was a good time because with what's going on with America, and Premier Ford has been out there speaking on behalf of Canada and fighting the battle.
Yeah.
And the way forward includes Indigenous people. If Canada's going to succeed and diversify, it has to do it with the Indigenous people and reinforce our role as a global energy superpower. We're top 10 in a number of areas, and that just needs to be strengthened. Ontario's going to be very important in that, and come to the Ring of Fire and critical minerals, because everybody talks about that, and that's something that people know over here. Oh, what is this Ring of Fire all about?
Right.
What's going on with that?
So just a couple comments before we jump into the Ring of Fire. Ontario has a massive profile in base metals and critical minerals. The Ring of Fire in particular is an exquisite, quantitatively and qualitatively deposit, plural, of the lion's share of what we categorically refer to as critical minerals. But you also have to have some baseline capacity when you talk about the Ring of Fire. And Ontario has that in spades. We have obviously the Sudbury Basin, which is a world-class and caliber nickel deposits, amongst other things. We have other critical mineral deposits in other parts of Northern Ontario, particularly in Northwestern Ontario with lithium coming on board. But the Ring of Fire is located some 400 to 500 kilometers north of the last highway, if you will. Think of it as a corridor from Toronto to Montreal, but through one of the James Bay lowlands, a world-renowned carbon sink, and frankly, as somebody who has lived there for extended periods of time, obviously not my life, but working up north in many of the communities proximal to the Ring of Fire as a nurse, I have a deep appreciation for the land and the relationship that Indigenous peoples have with it. And so we want to be very careful in its development, but we've taken a decidedly different approach than previous governments and really invested in First Nations leadership, especially when it comes to the environmental assessments. They're nearly completed. And the Corridor to Prosperity, as I had named it a number of years ago, I think we're hopeful that we can start that fairly soon. In some respects, we already have, because we're developing what we call the Greenstone area. It's a large municipality that sits at the base of just off the Trans-Canada. It'll ultimately form, a major corridor that has to be, a couple of kilometers wide. We're going to talk about, major machinery to build something like that. It's interesting because the mine sites themselves will be relatively small in scale to the infrastructure itself. But I would just close on that preliminary question, Mark, by saying that, this particular region where the Ring of Fire is located is very remote. And the 5 or 6 communities that are closest to it are the last 5 or 6 communities in the province that are still on diesel generation for electricity. Hard to believe.
Yes.
But we want to ensure that the communities are key partners, obviously, but also benefit from development in the region.
Yes. And
road access, I think, is, for a number of reasons, if you think about it, is not just about reaching prospective, no pun intended, mining sites, but also to connect communities to those resource development projects, and for the benefit of better health, social, economic capacity and infrastructure moving forward.
Yes, thank you for that. There's a question about where's the added value of the processing.
Mm-hmm.
And China has that capacity. And even though a lot of people around the world talk, critical minerals, there's deposits here.
Yeah.
Will it be the objective in Ontario, in Canada, to be processing the critical minerals there? Or will it just...
Absolutely, Mark. I mean, we already do it with base metals. So we, gold is obviously processed on site. And Ontario has, yields about 50% of Canada's annual production of gold. And we have some very high yield gold mines. But in the critical mineral space, obviously, with the global focus on it, including the United States, just to not bash them for a moment.
They're always focused on us.
Yeah, they are. But it's kind of crazy. But, we think that, I've used the metaphor, earth to electric vehicles, mines to motors, is entirely possible in Northern Ontario. We send currently things like minerals like palladium to Norway. Lithium is still, something that Germany is, in the best position the world over outside of China. And I would just say, Mark, that processing in China comes at a cost, right?
Yes.
A huge cost. From an environmental perspective, not just at the locations that they extract around the world, labor practices, their expectations of how and that critical mineral comes to market is significantly different than what the rest of the world, and in particular Canada, and for our purposes, Ontario, would be. And I think I said at the summit, I recall saying that this is probably one of the rare opportunities for a sub-sovereign government, the province of Ontario, to give the world one of its greatest environmental gifts, and that is to develop the critical minerals to enhance our position in the electrification, battery storage, all those technologies that are now, a central feature of automotive technology and other areas, storage of electricity, all very exciting things. And we intend to do it better, but processing, scaling up for that is not just an exercise of building a processing facility. Obviously, I don't want to get too granular, but, lithium has 2 or 3 different, and there may be more, processing types, if you will, or processes, and other critical minerals do as well. The electrification, very intense. Pre-positioning Northern Ontario to capture that, I think is ambitious, but very possible. And Thunder Bay, obviously Sudbury, that corridor, I think, holds great promise for our ability to ensure that we process those critical minerals so they're extracted, processed fairly close to where the mine sites are located, and moved to markets in Southern Ontario prospectively for a fully integrated supply chain.
Yes, which would be great, and that's what Canada needs to do in terms of moving up the value chain and capturing more of that, the value that's created.
Yeah. What sort of timeline are we looking at for first access road in the best case? Or
so, there's a difference between starting it and completing it, obviously, given its length, or distance. But as I said earlier, in some respects, we've already started. We made an announcement just before the last election we had this winter, that brought on board a partnership with Arrowland First Nation. Martin Falls and Webequie had been and remain, key proponents and partners in the development of the corridor and ultimately the Ring of Fire. But I think the corridor proper, Rob, which I would refer to as sort of the end of the existing roads, be they primary or secondary routes from the Trans-Canada due north, talking about 70 kilometers, need to be upgraded to spec, right, to handle a transportation corridor for people, programs, services, and obviously industry. And I think, just having some discussions after hours, so to speak, here in London, we think that within the next year or so, we can actually start, baseline construction activity of the corridor. That's very encouraging.
It is.
Some of this has to be driven by markets, and I think we have we have to keep that in perspective. But this is as I said, one of the central part of the very northern Ontario that would benefit from a corridor in addition to any mining activity.
Is there any opportunity that you will be using Hudson's Bay to ship out minerals to Europe as opposed to going down south?
There's lots of discussion about that. I know that we're in the midst of a federal election and people are looking at alternative routes. It's a long way from the Ring of Fire. And that transportation corridor would actually have to come south and then head west to Manitoba and then up. I think probably the most direct route would likely be James Bay. But we're talking about some, first of all, very pristine and mostly frozen waters there. So you have those challenges in front of you. And obviously, First Nations communities, rightly hold that part of the region as an area that deserves some protection. The Manitoba corridor is through to Hudson's Bay is exciting because it's mostly already there.
Right.
As a Toban, you can appreciate that it's a not very wide but very narrow and far north province that already has access routes and passage through Churchill. So that would be another opportunity that I think are related to things likely more around Western Canada as opposed to what the projects we're talking about in Northern Ontario.
Recently, statistics showed that last year in 2024, Canada foreign direct investment, FDI, hit record levels. And what was encouraging for somebody like me who spent 27 years in London, and Mark is still in London, but there's less reliance than ever on American capital coming from the U.S. So I think there was a record low representation from the U.S., maybe only 33% coming from the U.S. Are you seeing signs of that there's more international capital coming to Canada?
Well, it starts with, I think, the ever intensifying political lens coming from other parts of the world than just the United States, and start going off and talking about tariffs, a very, very popular subject right now. Stay tuned by the minute. But yes. I think Ontario, obviously going to be impacted the most by the tariffs is, the lesson there and the opportunity, in my view, is to encourage investment from countries outside of the United States. I think the lesson we're learning is that we had become, as the United States had, one might think of it, quite indulgent for obvious reasons in a trade relationship. But I think it's a testament to the exercise in London, at the summit, and the activities of other cabinet colleagues that global markets are moving their interest, and the money is coming with it, to Canada, to Ontario. And I think that's a good thing. It's a medium-term thing that will manifest itself in, passing. It's going to be different forever. I'm looking at the screen now. It will go beyond President Trump. Yes. And if I think that provinces in Canada as a whole revisits that over-reliance on the United States at their own risk. So
I've only been back in Canada after the 27 years in London for a short amount of time. I have never seen the level of patriotism at the moment from the Buy Canada campaigns to, booing national anthems, which is
not a big fan of that.
Not a big
Blood
fan.
was spilled for those songs. And,
absolutely.
yeah.
But I hope that this patriotism lasts, and that the desire to look outside of North America continues beyond the current troubles, and that we don't go back to status quo.
No question, it's a patriotic exercise and a very, meaningful, unifying exercise as well, including provinces like Quebec. But in the context of the summit, one of my key reflections there, and I think I commented on it in the panel that I participated in, has been how quickly, First Nations communities, political leaders and business leaders have come to the side and unified around a very patriotic but very important, not just symbolic, exercise, if you will, to assure that we're all in this together. And I think as the summit manifestly, different panels that I attended suggested, this is an opportunity for Indigenous businesses to elevate their profile as we look towards a more pan-Canadian trade relationship, as between provinces, as between communities spanning the country and in Ontario, and from there, you talk about global investment, form new partnerships, which I think was a central kind of theme at the summit, to cue investors here in the heartbeat of the world of finance, London, that Indigenous businesses were going to be a key part of that. We agree, and that's a good thing. But it was great, to think of it. I mean, I think a couple of Sean, I mentioned him earlier, said it, and as did other First Nation leaders. They have always been at the side of Canada, if you will, when some would suggest they sure have enough reasons not to be. But from the War of 1812 through Confederation and to the modern day and the crisis that we're in, they've been steadfast and communicated to us at a political level. And I think we heard it at the summit, that they're very much with the Canadian, very patriotic, but very, on the economic side of it, willingness to be all in for.
Well, coming back to the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
I think you saw, reflecting back on the summit, we had very few politicians.
Yeah.
In fact, you were the only one, but we're very pleased with what you brought to the table, because the audience didn't want to hear, here's the messaging.
Yeah.
They want to hear what's actually going on and what will happen. So we really appreciate that you brought that, because it's difficult to step out and say, okay, we're going to participate because it is a commercially driven summit. How do we connect the capital? So that was very important. We appreciate your contribution to that.
Well, Mark, let me just say that politics, as we're learning with the tariffs, plays a big role in economics. No question about it. But I felt the same way. Like I said, it's actually a good thing that there aren't that many, if any, politicians. I was unplugged to the extent that I felt really comfortable with the folks that were holding court, hosting panels, and Rob, a pretty big fan of yours and the career that you've had. And it's just a testament to, I think, a promising future. And that voice is Indigenous. And it was on full display, generationally, I might add. right? You had Chief Terry Paul there, but you had, the Tabitha Bulls and the Sean Willies, and there's another
Chief Derek App.
Derek App.
I mean, holy smokes, does he just blow your doors off or what, right? These are exciting and dynamic political leaders, but also, fantastic, as they've proved, business leaders. We need to hear them, and it's okay for politicians to not be the front row center piece of it. My decision to come here was an assessment of who was there that I could go listen to, more than just participate in. And I think we carved out a spot that folks appreciated, had context, but it didn't elevate, Canadian politicians to a place that it in my view, took over the spotlight on one of the most exciting things taking place in Canada and in Ontario right now.
We really appreciated your time and your contributions, and appreciate your time again today.
Thanks for having me.
The Honourable Greg Rickford. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Miigwech.
Thank you to Honourable Greg Rickford, Member of the Provincial Parliament of Ontario, representing the riding of Kenora Rainy River, for sharing his insights with us. And thank you for viewing and listening. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.